Hello everyone, welcome to my course on VBA. This first video is really just to tell you what VBA is and why you'd use it. And what I've thought about in this course is a lot of VBA courses are they're kind of very complicated, or sometimes they assume you already know a lot of stuff that you sometimes don't know. And I wanted to try and make a course that's more for beginners, people who've never used VBA before but kind of want to start getting into it. And then just slowly do kind of short videos on short, simple things that you can do. And then once you learn those skills, you can sort of add them together to do more complicated stuff. So first things first, what is VBA? Well, VBA stands for Visual Basic for Application. Just to give you some kind of history, if you've ever opened a .exe file, chances are that program was written in a language called Visual Basic, which is from Microsoft as well, obviously. So Visual Basic is a big standalone project where you can create like executable files, so .exe files, like a program. Whereas VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, is that. It's just for applications, and what they mean by applications really is Office. I don't know why they call it VBA versus VBO, but well. So most people use VBA for Access or Excel, probably Excel more than anything, but I do know it's used a lot in Microsoft Access too. I do believe that you can do it with Word, and I don't even know if you can do it with Office, Outlook, but I don't think so. But anyway, so I'm going to focus on Excel because I've never used it for anything other than Excel. But if you have Excel or Microsoft Office, you have VBA. You don't have to buy anything. It already comes with your Microsoft Office. So just to give you kind of my own history a little bit on why I do this, I was in a bookstore and I saw VBA for Dummies book. This was like 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And I'm like, what's this? Because I was kind of learning Excel, and I'd never heard of VBA. And so I bought the book, started reading it, started learning how to do some basic programming, and was just blown away by how much I could speed up the work that I did every day. Because at the job I was at, I was doing a lot of spreadsheets, and it was time consuming. Now, this is more sort of theoretical or sort of thinking outside the box or philosophically, but think about if you're working and you're doing Excel spreadsheets, there's probably a good chance that you waste a lot of time just taking one spreadsheet and converting it to something different so you can then use it. So let's say, for instance, you have a program that exports to Excel. And so you get this export, and this export maybe has 100 columns in it. And for the work that you do, maybe you only use 5 of those columns. And the columns aren't the first 5; they're scattered throughout the whole, spreadsheet. It's like column 1, column 12, column 17, whatever. And so maybe you delete all those columns because you don't use them. And then the columns that remain, maybe the information you're trying to pass on to your boss or whoever, you have to type in some formulas after you've deleted all those other columns that give you information about the 5 or 6 columns that you saved, right? All that stuff takes time, and that's wasted time because there's no value in doing that. Think of it like driving to work, right? If you drive 30 minutes every day to work, that's wasted time. Ideally, you could snap your fingers and just go from home to work. It could be like, zap yourself instantaneously from one place to another, unless you just like driving, I guess. But the point is, that's wasted time. That's a half an hour of your day that you're not really doing anything useful. You would eliminate it if you could. So think of that as what VBA does for you. If you have a spreadsheet and you get it one way and you got to pass it on another way, all that time in between is like driving to work. If you could just do that instantaneously, you would probably do that, and it would save you a ton of time, and you get days of your life back. So that's what VBA does for you. But And so what it really is just a programming language that automates your spreadsheets and does things for you automatically at the click of a button. So the other advantage from that saving time is that it also eliminates mistakes, because if you ever typed in a formula and typed it in wrong one time, so normally you do it the same way every time and you send it out and everything works great and everybody's happy, but then one day you typed in a formula, instead of dividing something by 2 like you're always supposed to do, you accidentally hit the 3 key, and somebody's like, "You idiot," and now you look like a fool to the person that you sent that off to, right? So by automating it, you make sure that it does it the same way every time, and you never have to worry about those kind of mistakes. So before we get into how to program in VBA, I kind of want to show you what VBA looks like. So I have this little spreadsheet up. It's like a fake poker winnings tracker kind of thing. So let's say that I wanted to record something. Now, some of you may know about macros. Macros are VBA code. It's just VBA code that Excel writes for you. So it records everything you do. It writes that as a code, and then when you play that macro back, it does it again. So let's say I go into my View tab, my macros, I hit Record Macro. Just so you know, you can also record a macro by going down here and hitting this little button. It says no macros are currently recording. Click to begin recording a new macro. So since I'm already down here, I'll just do that. So it brings up this little macro record window. It's calling it Macro 4 because I've been playing around a little bit making this video, and this is the 4th time I've done it. So it already used 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we hit OK, and then let's say we type in a date, 7/10. We'll take 50 out, 200 in, and then I've got a formula here that just adds it like an accounting kind of thing, and then I hit stop. All right. So for most of you, if you've ever recorded a macro, if you wanted to do that again, we'll delete it here. You get record instead of record, you'd hit View Macros. I got this macro I recorded here. This 7 is also one that I was playing around with earlier, so we're going to remove that, so ignore that. So macro 4, we hit run, boom, it puts it back in there again. So you can see, even though this didn't take me a lot of time to type these things out, it did take time. And by doing it a macro, it occurred instantaneously. I clicked one button and boom, it was done. So think about that on a much bigger scale. That's what VBA can do for you. But you know something obviously happened behind the scenes, and you know Excel recorded something. So let's look at what Excel recorded. So if you already have this developer tab up here, this is where we're going. But if you don't have it, just right click in the ribbon, see where it says customize ribbon, and then you should see in here where this developer tab is, it'll be unchecked for you. That's why you don't see it. So just check it and then you'll have it. So Visual Basic, again, that's what we were talking about, VBA, and you can see when I hover over it, it says Alt F11. So I can either bring it up by going to the developer tab and hitting this button, or I can just hit Alt F11. So we're going to try that. You can't really see me doing it, but that's what I'm doing. I'm hitting Alt F11, and boom, this comes up. Okay? Now, see how this work here? That was what Microsoft Excel recorded when we did that. See? So let's explain a little bit about what we're looking at. So first thing we have is it's called a subroutine. There's 2 types of macros, subroutines and functions. We'll get into functions eventually, but just so you understand what a function is, because I hate talking about something and not at least explaining what the heck it is. If I type in that, the sum of these 2 things, you can see it adds it up for there. That sum is my function. So these are already functions that Excel has in them, and if you use those, you know there's a ton of them. But that's what a function is. So you're not just limited to the functions Excel gives you. You can write new functions in VBA. I don't do it very much because I've never had a need for one, but we'll get into doing that at some point during this lesson series, hopefully. But I just wanted you to know that you have the opportunity to do that too. So we're doing subroutines, and we're probably going to focus on subroutine. So it recorded this subroutine, but if I wanted to start a new one from scratch, I could just type sub, I don't know, testing we'll call it, and then I put the little parentheses at the end. The parentheses are there because there are arguments you could put inside there. I don't do that very often. I've only done it a couple times, and usually it's code I've stolen from somebody else. So I couldn't even think of a good example to put in there right now, but hopefully as time goes on I'll learn a little bit better myself and I'll be able to pass it on to you. But as soon as I hit enter, you're going to see it puts end sub. Okay? So think of it like these parentheses. A lot of things you're going to do in VBA, it's going to have a sort of start and an end. So if you have a left parenthesis, you always have to have a right parenthesis. If I write a sub, I always have to have end sub. Some of the code we're going to be doing are going to be what's called if arguments. If I have an if-then argument, then I have to have an end of the if argument. Or if I have a loop, I have to have a start and an end to that loop. So sometimes some of the errors you're going to run into along the way where Visual Basic it crashes on you when you're trying to run a program are just going to be because that you started something and you didn't tell it where it ended. So in this particular case, when you type in sub, it automatically types end sub because that has to be there and it knows you have to do that. But that's one of the few times where it's actually helpful for you on that. It doesn't always end it for you like that. But anyway, so let's go back to our thing. This first part, you see these little apostrophes, and then like this just says macro 4 after it. These are comment blocks. And what that means is this is not anything that VBA is going to run. It's just there to give you, the programmer, information. So I'm going to delete these because they're kind of useless. But let's say I wrote this program and I wanted to remember what I did. So maybe I would type my little apostrophe and I would go, this selects the cell C21, I guess. And you can see it makes it green, I believe. I'm colorblind. I always thought it was red, but somebody told me it was green. So that's just, as you're writing code, this is a really, really good practice. Make comments, and they can be as long as you want them to be. Anytime you go to a new line, though, you got to hit another apostrophe. So just make sure that you write enough information there so that if you ever, like, imagine you write code today and it works, and then you're not going to touch it for a while because it worked, right? And you use that stuff every day for a year. And then maybe the code you wrote was for an export from some program. So then somebody goes in and changes that way that thing exports on you. So now your program doesn't work anymore, and you have to go back in and modify it. You probably won't remember precisely what you did and why you did it in here. So that's what these comments are for. They help you to understand what you did and why you did it. So if you have to go back and modify it later, you can search for this text potentially. You can, or if you just don't understand why you did something, it just explains it to you so you can remember. Because one of the things you're going to find with doing VBA is you're going to steal code from other people. There's websites like Stack Exchange and stuff like that that have all kinds of users who share information about how to write code. People submit things they're trying to write and it's not working, and then somebody else will help them on how to fix it. You'll get information from Microsoft itself. They have a library that explains kind of very basically what each and every single function in VBA is. So as you learn the code, that's going to be a huge resource for you, but we'll get into that later. So that's what this comment is for. And then, so let's take a look at what it did here. So we were on this thing when we started. So it was saying, hey, in this active cell, formula R1C1 equals 7, 10, 20, 20. And then the next thing we did was select this next one. So we selected range B21, select, and then that active cell formula, make that 50. Now, the macro recorder records a lot of information, sometimes information that you don't even need. But it's recording it because it just always records it in the most complete way possible. But you wouldn't write code like this. It's just, that's how it sort of records it. In other words, you wouldn't write code this complicated with all this extra extraneous stuff. Basically you can see that. And then remember, I copied my formula on the last one. So down here, I went to this one, selected it, copied it, and then went to this cell, selected it, and then pasted it, right? So if I already deleted it. So if I run this again, you can see what it does. Boom, right? It puts it in there. I'm not sure why I did that. Oh, I wasn't on the active cell. So if we run it again, boom, it puts it in there. Okay, so let's just give you an idea what I mean by you wouldn't necessarily write code this way. So we have a select and then something to do to the selection. Well, I don't need to write all that. I could just take out the select and selection, and I put range D20 copy, right? And then I got a selection and then paste, active sheet paste. So I could delete that stuff too. So now I've just got copy and paste, right? So go back to my active cell again, run. Oops. Oh, sorry. I've got it. I'd have to write that differently. But here, you notice I had 4 lines, so let's go back. We're going to hit stop. Let's go back, delete this. And now I condensed them to 1 line, and it still did exactly the same thing. Okay? And here, I'm going to delete all this out again. I didn't even need to type all this junk. I could have just hit, like let's say I always wanted to make sure I went to the cell. This says on the active cell do this, which was the cell I was on at the time. But maybe I want to make sure it always does it on A21. So I just type range A21. And then I'm not sure why it records it as formula R1C1, but you don't need that. You can just take that part out. And then I could do the same thing with all of this. I could remove all this stuff. A lot of times when you see, if you're recording a macro and you see where it says select, you can probably condense all that by making that all 1 line. So now, I think we can run this again. Boom, you see it did all the same thing. So now we just have range 821 equals 7, 10, 20. So you can see VBA wrote that code way more complicated than it needed to be, but that's just how VBA does it, because it writes everything extremely complete, because I don't even know what their logic is for that, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, you don't need to write code that way, and you wouldn't write code that way. But the reason I'm explaining that and showing you how it recorded a macro is that's going to be your best friend. If you're trying to figure out how to do something, and you can go online and try and find somebody who's explained how to do that thing, but it could take you forever to find it. So what you can do if you're trying to write your own code, let's say when I'm done, maybe instead of winning, I lose. So I make it 0 there, right? And So now if I run this, you can see it looks like I lost money. So now maybe if this is going to be a 0, I want it to be in red. You know, so we go to my font and I make it red like that, right? So let's go back for a minute. Okay, so what if I just wanted to learn how to make that red? Well, I could go online and try and find somebody who explains how to do that, or I can just record that as a macro. So I go to that, font, make it red. Is that red? No, there it is. No, there it is. And then I hit stop. Alright, so you can see it recorded that real quick. So with my selection, font color is -167777024, tint and shade equals 0, and width. Alright, so what it did was it said, hey, it's basically saying with whatever I've selected, do this stuff to it. So the other thing I could do, we didn't tint or shade it, we just colored it. So I'm going to take all my comment parts out again, and then I've got the sort of code I needed. So let's say we go to range, what was that, C21? Dot color, oops, dot color equals -167777024. Alright. Alright, so I'm going to make this black again because it'll remember that. Okay, so now we'll delete this again. Now we run it. Oh, I put color, but you notice it says up here with selection dot font dot color, so I need to make that font dot color. And then if we hit play, boom, finishes it. So anyway, if you're trying to write code and you're not sure how to do something, but you know you could do it manually, just record it as a macro, then steal that code. And I could have typed the whole thing in there, but I just, once you get better at it, you're going to learn how you can steal bits out of it and get what you need to get from it. Okay? So anyway, that's sort of an introduction to VBA. The last bit I'll tell you is the other really big advantage to VBA is you can ask the user for information. So whereas with a macro I can only record what I'm doing, here I could do something like we'll call dr for like date range equals input box, and then we'll just type date like a question, right? And then over here we've created this variable, so this dr. So that's not code. I just created that. I wrote that. DR stands for date range. I could have called it your mom. Doesn't matter. I can call it whatever I want. It's a variable that I'm creating later. Now, we'll get into this, but anytime you create a variable, it's good practice to what's called declare that variable. So we declare it by typing a dim statement, and then the variable, and then what kind of variable it is. You can see it brought up all these different types. A date would be like a string of text. Integer is really popular. Double is an integer, for those of you who don't remember from math class, an integer is like any whole number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nothing with decimal points. So a double would be a number with decimal points. But this is a date, so I don't know if it has a... Yeah, it does have a date. So we can define dim dr as a date. We could also define it as a string. But anyway, so we declare it as a date. So now when VBA or Excel goes to look for this thing, it knows that, oh, that thing I'm looking for, there's a date. So if you don't define it, I think it automatically just assigns it a variable, which is kind of a general thing. And most code would probably work that way, but it's just, I'm not going to get into all the theory behind it because I don't know that I could explain it all that well. But it just helps for VBA to understand what that variable is supposed to be. So we declare dim dr as a date, and then we say dr equals input box date, and I'll get into that stuff function by function down the road, but I just want you to understand what VBA can kind of do. And so now we put range 821 equals dr. So we've declared our variable so VBA knows what to expect. We've defined what that variable is, and we're asking the user via an input box what the date is. And I could have, again, typed anything in here, like, what's the date, dude? Right? And then this, I'm saying in range 821, make it equal to whatever this dr is. So we hit play, date, dude. So we type 7/17/2020, and you can see it put the date in there, filled it in. Alrighty, so that's sort of an introduction to VBA, and so these subsequent videos will try and cover little bits and pieces of VBA, hopefully one at a time. I want to make one video per thing, so like one video to show how to do an input box, stuff like that. So everything's very simple, short bite-sized things that you can start to piece together as time goes on. So thanks, hope you enjoy the series.